My name's Kerry Mansell and I am a Gestalt counsellor and life coach here in the Eugene area, and I am here today to talk to you a little bit about relationship blind spots. Now let me give you an example. Let's say perhaps you're the kind of person that wants to date somebody who's funny and affectionate and likes to go out a lot. And you start dating, and all of a sudden you find that you're in a relationship with somebody who's actually dismissive and doesn't know how to take care of himself and can't return a phone call. How is it that that happens? Imagine if we went to a restaurant and you ordered a chickpea salad, yet they bought you a bacon burger. How many bacon burgers would you have to eat before you question the system? It's a common question. How is it that we want one thing and we end up with another? I hear it from clients, I hear it from friends. Well, let me tell you this. There's a language involved. And I would teach you the language. Thing is that you already know it. We each learn a very specific emotional language from our families of origin. So let me explain. Today I'm going to be teaching you how it is that we learn that language, how it is we recognize the language, why it is that we're drawn back to the same language again and again, and then some different suggestions for how it is that we might bring those patterns into some consciousness so we can begin to make the changes that we're looking for. When I began asking these questions for myself, I have to say that I really wanted to believe that the answer was going to be in a glossy magazine. That I could figure out that my hair was too long or too short, that my accent was wrong, that I wasn't attractive enough, or that I was choosing men that weren't the right astrological sign. I really wanted there to be a quick fix. As we move forward, there are a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. These things that we're going to learn about ourselves, they're not set in stone. This is just information. It's a little bit like this analogy. Now, if I got up now and went to my refrigerator to see what things were in it that I was going to keep and what I was going to throw away, I wouldn't be that concerned about where it was those things came from. I would just be concerned about whether or not they were working for me and I wanted to keep them or toss them. What we're doing is we're finding different levels of ourselves, bringing them into consciousness so we can make choices as we move forward instead of operating blindly off old information that we weren't paying any attention to. The important thing is that we're gentle with ourselves. We're here to let the good in, and we're going to be gentle in doing that. We're going to start with babies. Perfect, brilliant little babies. So we come into this world absolutely perfect, these little wee babies, and we don't know any language at all, not a word. And I'm going to use English as the example in this because that's my first language. So I came into this world and I knew not a word. Here we go. Here's a dreadful photograph of me as a little baby in a swimming pool and a very bad bikini. At this time, I didn't know any words. In fact, most babies don't begin to say any words till they're about 9 months old, somewhere in the 9 months to a year. So at the very beginning, what happens is our caregivers teach us different objects: dog, cat, nose, eyes, knee, word by word. And then remarkably, by the time we're about 3 years old, we know 200 words. And we can actually, string some sentences together. More remarkably, by the time that we're 7 years old, we know 10,000 words. And this doesn't happen because our parents teach us each of the words that go in between the words that they taught us. It's because we are immersed. It is the water we are boiled in. We absorb all of the information around us and we hear lots of different people speaking, and hey presto, we end up with this vast vocabulary. Really quite a remarkable system, immersion. Well, the same thing holds true for the emotional language we're surrounded by. At this time, whether we realize it or not, we are learning a great deal about what it means to be a human, what it means to be a human in our family, what it means to be a daughter or a son, what it means to be a brother or a sister. All of these things, we suck it up like a sponge, the same way that we sucked up English. Let's say we had two older sisters and we were always left out. So we began to understand ourselves as being the one that was left out. Or let's say we had a family where every time we got sick, we got attention, but we didn't get a lot of attention otherwise because there were too many kids. We learned if you get sick, you get attention. To get attention, you get sick. Okay, so these simple questions are designed to help you explore what it was like growing up in your household. So, in your household, what role did you play? Were you always the one that got in trouble? Or maybe you were the one who never got in trouble while your brother always got in trouble. Maybe you grew up having to take care of your mother's feelings, or perhaps protecting one of your siblings. Maybe you had to tiptoe around your father's anger. Maybe you grew up not trusting your own instincts and being told that your opinion was wrong a lot. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where the world was scary. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where you were considered too much. These are kind of simple questions, but it is important to unpack what it was that your family looked like if you're trying to understand how it is that you view the world now and your place in it and your place in relationships. So I think that one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself is, how did I get my needs met? So, as little babies, we come into the world and our primary concern is our survival and getting our needs met. Let me give you a personal example. So, I was brought up by a single parent, my dad, and at the time, for most of my childhood, I was an only child, so I got used to being alone. And when my dad came home from work, he worked very long hours to make our lives better. Um, he wasn't very communicative, he was kind of tired, he wasn't really that interested in things that were interesting to little girls. And so I began to form assumptions about the world based on this information. And one of the things that I began to assume was that if I wanted to have my needs met, that I was going to have to meet them myself. That's a very simple formula. If you don't get your needs met, then you either stop having needs or you learn just to meet them yourself. Going forward into my adult life, what that meant was I had to learn a new language. I had to learn that it was okay for me to have needs. I had to learn that it was okay for me to ask to have my needs met. Just because someone wasn't able to help me with my homework doesn't mean that they can't help me in my grown up life. I also had to learn that people might be engaged and interested in things that I was engaged and interested in. These were all new lessons. Now, it seems like a very simple example, but we take a simple formula like that and we bring it forward into our lives. And it is possible to learn a new language. But even in the learning of the new language, it would be impossible for me to forget the original English that I was taught. How we get our needs met as kids often defines how it is that we get our needs met as adults. So, for example, if the only way you got approval in your family was by getting high grades, chances are you've become an overachiever. Perhaps you have more than 2 degrees. If you got your needs met by ratting out your brother, possibly those kinds of behaviors still exist where you're competing with those around you in order to feel valid. You could have a situation that was very different, for example, from my own childhood. Let's take an opposite look. Perhaps you had a mother that was all up in your grill, and perhaps she hovered and she took care of all of the details and she inserted herself into every different part of your existence. Then you might grow up as somebody who prefers relationships that were really enmeshed, or somebody who is looking for a controlling partner who's going to make all of the decisions. or somebody who expects that everybody else makes you their first priority. As you can see, it's a very simple imprint that can continually move forward. Now, this isn't about judging your parents and deciding what was right and wrong or good and bad. That's really not the point. This is more about discovering what feelings you came out of your childhood with. That's the important part. Now, when I was a kid, I thought that if you swallowed cherry pits, that cherry trees would grow out your ears. It didn't make it true. Remember, this is information that this emotional information is what we intuited with a very young mind. Let me give you an example of how that might look in two completely different situations. So let's say you have a parent that is an alcoholic, and who, let's say we have two parents that are alcoholics, and they are really entirely unavailable to you as a child, and because of that, you come out of your childhood feeling abandoned. On the flip side, you might have come from a family with two very hard-working parents who were really involved in their communities, who absolutely adored you, but were just not home that much because they were out doing all these other good things. You might still come out of that childhood feeling abandoned. What is important is the feelings that you came out with. These are the things that we are most likely to recreate in our adult relationships, that feeling state. Now, discovering these dynamics, identifying our tendencies, figuring out what it is that we are looking for and whether or not that's working for us anymore, or whether or not that's a coping mechanism that we can now let go of. Those identifying all that stuff is actually, to me, one of the most solid benefits of one-to-one counseling. This is a complicated process, but once we discover the things that draw us and the things that repel us, then we can begin to really make some effective choices about how we're showing up. Okay, so we know now that the same way we learned English is the same way that we learned our emotional language, by absorption, by immersion. We took it all in and then we're left with a specific language. How is it that we continue through our lives collecting these people that play into that same code? How is it that we end up with the same thing again and again without even meaning to? In fact, with the stated intent of not meaning to. Well, for this example, I am going to use how it is that we understand body language to illustrate to you how it is that you keep choosing people that fit a particular mold. You are incredibly good at body language. You have the capacity to tell when your best friend's bored at the movies without even really thinking about it. You don't have to think about how she's tapping her foot or how she's slumped in her chair to understand that she's not really into it. You can tell when your brother's mad at you, even though he's pretending that he's not. You can tell by looking out at a crowd of people what their relationships to each other might be. And there's a really good reason for this, and that's survival. We need to be able to ascertain whether or not someone's a physical threat to us or whether they're going to help us get our needs met. That is really animal 101. In fact, the part of the brain that governs this is also present in the brains of all the other animals. It's our limbic system. We call it the lizard brain because it's present in every other animal also. It's not the prefrontal cortex where we do all of our executive thinking and where those functions happen. It is the stuff that we don't think about. It has to be automatic. We don't have enough time to constantly be thinking about whether or not something is dangerous to us. We have to be able to recognize it straight away. And so we automatically have collected this information right from birth, and some of it genetically probably, some of it they believe now even generationally, that lets us know what is dangerous and what isn't. So you wander through your life and you absorb all of this information about people's body language and what messages they're trying to send and their intent, and you don't have to think about it at all. It is automatic. Our brains work by matching things. So if I see behavior that is familiar to me from my childhood, all my brain does is match it to the other behavior and go, yep. And it is an automatic process. I don't even see it. I believe that this is really where the relationship blind spots kick in, mainly because that behavior that we think we're so tuned into looking for is actually flying under our radar, because to us it just looks like home. So, for example, let's say you had a hypercritical parent, and the feeling that created was that you were never good enough. And that is the feeling that is stored in your mind under the emotional languages department. And then you meet somebody and you don't notice at first that they are hypercritical about everything that isn't you. You don't even register it. It flies completely under the radar because it doesn't stick out as something unusual. It feels like home to you. In fact, if anything, it would probably draw you closer to that person. So then 3 months pass and you're in a relationship with somebody that's hypercritical and you can't believe that you couldn't see it, or that you're back in this place. And you see people do this where they say all men cheat, or all women are nags, or they have some generalization. And the generalization is most often a reflection of their own makeup, their own understanding of the world. Have you ever heard that great phrase, what you say about other people says more about you than it does about them? That to me is similar to this whole dynamic. Study after study shows that humans will go towards the familiar. And it's because of that very powerful drive to survive. So, because of that drive to survive, we will go towards the things that we know helped us to survive traditionally. So, as babies, we come in, we fit into the family structure, we absorb the information that they have for us, information that we can see very clearly throughout our lives, a language that we always recognize, and we gravitate towards it because it guarantees survival. And it might seem absurd. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to us on a day-to-day basis. Why would we be drawn towards people that made us feel less than? But if that is what helped us to survive in those early years, then our brain, our animal, the most animal instinctive part of us, understands that that worked. And it is going to keep drawing us towards what worked. Imagine that you are walking in the forest and you get a little lost. And you're not too panicked, but you are hungry. So you keep walking for a bit and you come to a clearing. And in that clearing, there are lots of berry bushes. And there are two kinds of berries, blueberries and a really pretty red berry, but you just don't know what it is. Which berries do you eat? Well, of course, you eat the blueberries. And you eat the blueberries because you know that they're not poisonous. And that is one of the reasons that we gravitate towards the familiar. We do it for survival. And our limbic system also makes those choices for us. We are geared to survive. When babies are born, it looks as though they're just here to be cute, but in reality, they are little survival machines. We come into our families and we establish very quickly what it is that is going to help us survive. That survival instinct is one of the reasons I think that we find change so threatening and sometimes so difficult. On some level, those patterns represent our emotional blueberries. And stepping away from those patterns can feel almost life-threatening. Let's remember here to be really kind to ourselves. These survival skills were a brilliant solution. They were the very things that got us through our early childhood. They were genius. It's only now that they might not be serving us, but it doesn't mean that we've done anything wrong. We, in fact, did exactly what we needed to do to survive. So it's really important that you remember that you absolutely did your best. Now that we know how it is that we develop our emotional language, how it is that we continue going towards it, why we continue to go towards it, let's talk about now the different ways that we might want to break that down. Now, I have 5 suggestions that are relatively simple ways that you can begin to address this for yourself. The first suggestion is to surround yourself with the kinds of relationships that you would like to be in. I used to be attracted to men that were really flashy, and I paid attention to the strong relationships that I admired, and I found that a lot of the time, the kinds of men that my friends were dating, long term and happily, were not that flashy. I didn't even know what to look for when I was looking for a good partner. So I was continually going towards the kinds of men that weren't actually interested in being in relationships, but looked really good that first night. Surround yourself with those relationships. Have a look at what that looks like and what that might mean. Again, it's pretty hard to find something when you don't know what it looks like. The second thing that you can do to make this process easier for yourself is to work on your friendships. And when I first heard this, I thought it was a little crazy because I thought if I wanted better relationships, that I should be out looking for better relationships. Actually, what I've come to find is that by working on my friendships, I could actually find out what good love looked like. When my friendships were about mutual respect, kindness, understanding, shared goals, it was a lot easier for me to identify that in the relationships I engaged in. For example, if my best friend wouldn't stand me up or wouldn't speak to me unkindly or wouldn't treat me poorly, then why on earth would I accept that from a partner? Having good friendships allowed me to build the kind of esteem that I needed to begin to select powerful relationships. Third, spend some time examining what your emotional language might be. It is, in essence, the guidebook to your existence, so it would be a really powerful thing to be familiar with. It's amazing to me how many people can tell me the names of all 50 state capitals, but cannot tell me 3 of the overriding dynamics in their family that play out in their relationships. We all have them. So becoming familiar with what those family dynamics is a really potent place to start. Sometimes we can do that by ourselves, sometimes we can do it with a friend through some self-examination. Really, support groups, counselors, all life coaches, all very useful places to find the kind of help that you need to begin to get an understanding of what that emotional language really looks like and which ways it is and isn't working for you. My fourth suggestion is to embrace reality where you can. That's a really good system. To have a friend that has different blind spots than you, and perhaps you can share information about your dates verbatim, so each of you can offer insight for the other one, offer a new pair of eyes to see red flags. Pay attention. Pay attention when your friends are saying to you, wow, that guy doesn't seem like a good fit, he doesn't seem like your type. Often people around us see things a little bit more effectively for us than we do. Believing that we should always be pushing against that stuff is a blind spot in itself. So embrace reality, get with a friend, talk about what's really happening on your dates honestly, and perhaps rather than being in the fantasy life of what a relationship might look like, when we can bring some reality to it, then we can actually pursue the relationship that we want. And fifth, try some honest journaling. Make a practice of noticing what it is that is interesting to you about different partners or possible partners. If you go on a date, make a note of 3 things that you noticed about that date. This isn't about judgment. This is about gathering information to find out what it is that's working for you and what isn't working for you. How is it that you're showing up in these moments? Does it seem familiar? Does it feel like something that might have occurred in your childhood, kind of playing its way out again? Try some honest journaling and see if you can't have some breakthroughs that way. That's probably enough information for one sitting. I do want to remind you that this isn't a race. It is not a place where you are meant to be in judgment of yourself. It is definitely a place where you need to be gentle with yourself and open and inquisitive about all the new information that you can get. Um, Anyone that has watched this is entitled to one phone call with me. If you want to talk about a situation that you're in, I'm open to that. I love when people are in their process. And in the meantime, I want to encourage you to remember that you deserve all good things and let the good in. Bye now.